Welcome back to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story. David Webb is your engineer back up at the mothership of KPEN 102 FM. Miss any portion of this program, check me out at our website, radiorealty.us. In the studio is Assemblyman Charlie Pierce. Charlie, thanks for being part of the program today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about term limits. That's on my mind a lot right now.
Okay.
And at the assembly level, what do you think is going to happen? The conversation has been postponed. It's not off the table. Term limits may be repealed by your group. What's up?
Sure, it has been postponed. It's on the table. It has been introduced, and I suspect that there was a motion to amend, and that motion to amend had either passed or it's on the table there, being considered for the next meeting. We postponed. I think they're going to do a little rewrite, do some adjustments there.
Why is it even coming up?
I'm not sure. I guess where I'm at with it is I think what we need to do is respect the initiative process. It was voted on by the folks that went through the trouble of creating an initiative process and got it on a ballot, and the ballot, the election occurred, and folks weighed in on it. And, there's some that say, well, a small percentage of the registered voters participated in that election, and therefore, it's not a large majority. A minority actually made that decision. Irregardless, I think that it's still in an initiative process, and we need to respect that.
But why? This is something I've not been able to put my head around. It was Hal Smalley, Assemblyman Smalley, that brought it up. Why? Is he about to term out, or is there something pressing? There seems to be a campaign and an election cycle that takes place, people running. There are alternatives. There are choices. Right. People can sit out a term and then run again. I just can't figure out, and I'm not, obviously this wasn't your ordinance.
Right.
But
I don't want to speak for Hal Smalley or
put my head around it.
Any other assembly members. The comments that I make are mine, and I'll be responsible for my comments. But I guess if I were speaking to it, I've never really agreed with term limits myself, personally. A number of my constituents, I think it's probably a mixed bag as far as the comments I get from my constituency, and in favor of it or not in favor of it. And I've always maintained that if you don't like the job that an elected individual is doing for you, you have the opportunity to go to that ballot box and vote him out of service, or he or she. And I still maintain that, and I think there's a number of folks on the assembly that maintain that same thinking.
That seemed to be the consensus, is that
right.
I don't think I heard anybody speaking in favor of term limits, but they spoke in favor. Yourself, Assemblyman Wolf, and, well, I think even Haggerty and Smith and a few others spoke against term limits as a principle, but in favor of, well, it's the will of the people.
That's correct.
I don't know. I like the idea of term limits, personally.
Yeah. There's a lot of folks in the borough that do.
Yeah.
I wish that we had a greater turnout and a stronger voice at the last election that really kind of resoundingly reinforced the fact that term limits are a necessary thing in this borough.
I'm glad you brought that up. To that end, I think, just from me to you, if you as an assembly person and the assembly itself pays more attention to the actual vote and less, that will encourage more people to vote. See, we face the same thing down here with the non-prepared foods tax, the sales tax.
Right.
And the vote was ignored, and the two ordinances that would have amended that didn't pass, and so in effect we got what we wanted. But at the same time, I don't think that encourages more people to get out and vote when they do go out and vote, and then it's almost invalidated through some other process.
No,
anyway.
I think you have to respect the initiative process. It's not an easy task. It's a labor intensive task, and there are those folks that if they get through it and they succeed, I don't think 9 individuals on the assembly need to reverse that.
To that end, right now there's another initiative in the works, and it would raise your exemption, your primary home exemption, from $20,000 to $50,000. Since it was successful at the state level, now there's one within the borough to adopt that. What do you think about that?
Well, it'll generally, if it passes and we follow suit with it, if it passes, number one, I think we should follow suit with it, listen to the voters, enact it, and then we need to go into motion into making some adjustments as to how we're going to make up for the loss of revenue.
And what would that look like in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a number of options for us, and there's probably we probably lack the support to do what I think needs to be done. But there's many services, I believe, or a number of services in the borough that currently being done by borough employees that could be outsourced. You can look at I don't think anybody in the borough that's currently employed needs to be affected by any outsourcing, but I think that what you can do, and I've mentioned this to a number of administrations, that as people leave, what you do is you put committees together, process committees together, and you look at the process or the functions that are being done, and you see whether you can spread those functions amongst the existing employees that are within the borough and or outsource it.
How has that been received by administrations? You mentioned it to more than one. How is it typically received? Not well?
You know, it's not a popular issue because you're dealing with that. It's an emotional issue where you're dealing with those feelings, those things that tend to drive you back to, well, it just doesn't feel right to affect, Johnny, Jimmy, Joe, and Paula. But the reality is as those individuals retire or leave, there's a real non-emotional way to fix the problem, but we haven't adopted that.
We're also sitting on $100 million. You and I talked about this once before, a few weeks back. We've got $100 million in reserves. Is there a chance that we could possibly live a little leaner on some reserves if there is an impact with this initiative, should it pass?
I certainly think we could. Okay. I think that we've asked the school district to do it, and they've demonstrated. Interesting enough, I like the fact what Dr. Atwater has done. I really applaud him for some of his management strengths, in that he has gone in and looked at his budget, and he's found ways to, exist on his fund balance, and he's spending down his fund balance. In essence, what he's doing is he's avoiding coming to you, the taxpayer, and asking you to make a larger contribution. Mm-hmm. I applaud that. I think the borough could do the same thing.
As you see it, just in generalities, if you would, and Assemblyman Haggerty is going to be on the program in the second half of the show, and last week I did bring this up, and I said that I was shocked, I was a little surprised by his comment, and he knows that I'm going to ask him about this later in the program, that he said, as a sitting assemblyman, he said, we need to slow development. And it prompted me to then say to you, Charlie, okay, what do you think? Setting that comment aside, I will ask him about it, but let me ask you, what is the role of the assembly in our lives on the peninsula as you see it?
I think the role of the assembly is to make business and new business and commerce to occur without great difficulty. I think the government's role is to get out of the way and allow the private sector, and I emphasize private sector, not government, but private sector development and growth in our economies. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what helps pay the taxes, pays the property taxes. It generates more sales tax, and where does sales tax go? It helps to pay for our schools and it helps educate our kids. So,
in that thought, then, do you see the 2013-18, the anadromous streams ordinance? Do you see it complying with what you just defined as the role of government in our lives here?
No, I think that real short-sightedness in the initiative, this even being initiated, I don't see where we really gain much by doing this. It's been a big argument, mm-hmm. And I want to say I do appreciate and respect the discussions that have taken place. I really applaud and support the process, the discussion, being able to have an open discussion in regards to two sides of an issue, and that ultimately at the end of the day there's a majority vote, and we have to live with that vote. But I don't think it's a totally lost cause. I've got 4 ideas I want to share with you as I close, and
okay,
I'll
well,
leave
good.
it with that.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll be back with Assemblyman Charlie Pierce's 4 ideas for you here on Radio Realty. Welcome back to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story, your host for Great Adventures in Real Estate. In the studio with me is Assemblyman Charlie Pierce. During the second half of the program, don't forget Assemblyman Mako Haggerty will be our guest, and we'll tune in to our mortgage moment with Rhonda Johnson thereafter. Assemblyman Pierce, when we went to the break and said hello to some of our sponsors, you mentioned you've got 4 ideas or perhaps a 4-part plan. What do you got? Well,
I don't think all is lost here. I think that, the 2012-13 is passed. It's been enacted, and so the administration will move to bring it into enforcement. And
just to that end, anybody listening that's not aware, 2013-18 is the replacement for 2011-12, the anadromous streams ordinance. Right. That is currently going to zone 50 feet of your property from the water's edge backwards. Both sides, if you've got a stream cutting through your property, either side is going to be regulated on 50 feet back. Lakes, streams, and so forth that went through a whole big public process. And Charlie, your concept thereon.
So I don't think it's all lost. I think that the the process was good. I think it was there was some good discussion, and what I would say and encourage the folks to do in this borough, if you feel strongly, if you're still very strongly opposed to what has happened, what I encourage you to do is get behind an effort or an initiative to unelect these policymakers. I think anybody that would put their name on a code or legislation or an ordinance like this without taking equal consideration for your property rights should perhaps be questioned as to whether they could or should be representing you or your best interest. Additionally, I think we've seen some initiative efforts. This is probably a good one. You can put an initiative together and put it on a ballot 2013-18 and reverse this law. I don't believe 9 individuals should be making a decision like this. Maybe a better way to do it would be to ask the voters how they truly feel about this issue. It vets out some of the emotion. I think this was an emotional issue, and you could see there was two sides. There was those that feel that are very closely tied to the fishing and the fish, and then there's those that are very feel very strongly about protecting their property rights. And
I mean that's the interesting thing. And then there's the overarching third party, which was
right.
the folks that care about both.
Right.
But I don't know. Do you think that the science question was conclusive here?
No,
that this is actually going to work.
Don't. Here's another issue. I just want to bring this up real quickly. They talked about science. A number of the assembly members were all behind the science, and I really didn't hear any science presented in the room. And what I would think is if you had science, real science generally has a math problem with it. And a real simple question to ask those that believe in the science is, can you tell me how many fish ingress and egress the smolt that actually migrate in these streams to these areas where the habitat requires protection? And if the numbers are in decline and there's degradation, then perhaps we need to do this. But I don't know that that's the case. I don't think they really made a real strong case, and where the science was real convincing.
So as an assemblyman, you weren't presented with science and studies, tracking studies and so forth that would lead you to believe that, there really is a clear correlation between a decline in salmon return and an increase in development of private property.
That question was never, ever answered, and they didn't even attempt to answer it. And what they're doing is they're basing their science on events that have occurred in other states in the United States, and they're feeling that, well, if we don't follow suit, then perhaps we're subject to some of those same conditions and results. And I think that there's a different impact that's being placed on and I'm specifically talking about one fish, and it's called the king salmon. And if you look at the numbers, the current numbers are in the $3,000 to $4,000 escapement range right now. Of a fish that 10, 15, 20 years ago you had 20,000 fish, 25,000. Now, clearly the run is not over, but I still think that there's a number of impacts that are being placed on this fishery, and we're not willing to address those concerns. We haven't up to this point. And so I'm encouraging us to do just that. The fourth item I want to just talk about quickly, and not to belabor this, or third item, is I'd encourage you to call the mayor's office. His number is 714-2150, and encourage this mayor to veto this ordinance. Okay? He has the option to do this. He can take and turn this option back to the table and start a new discussion over it. If you voted for this mayor, I'd encourage you to call him and encourage him to support you and if you feel strongly about the issue here. And then the fourth item, I think, and I've talked a little bit with the mayor about this item, and he wasn't real supportive, but I think that a number of folks during the testimony got up and said, hey, there's certainly a compromise to my property, and it certainly must have a value to it. And that value, I think, could be very easily determined on each piece of property that is adjacent to a waterway. Come up with a mean average and apply it, and then discount those properties with that amount of money, and then take the loss in taxes that you have there and spread it amongst the rest of the property owners so that everybody is impacted and shares in the real cost of providing habitat protection.
That's a very tricky thing to accomplish, and I presume that being the fourth plank of your position here would really be to help illustrate that there is a financial impact on the property owners. That's not what you want. I mean, that's ultimately, though, that would make it more fair.
The mayor's position is that the evaluation of your property already occurs, and you're being considered for whatever the condition is on your property when your taxes are issued. I want to do something totally separate and over and above this. There is a legal question as to whether this is or isn't legal, and I'm seeking independent legal counsel to determine whether it is or isn't a legal option for the folks in the borough. And if it is a legal option, I'm going to consider floating an ordinance to that effect.
Excellent. So those are 4 good points as I remember them. Unelect, show up, get out the vote if you're dissatisfied with what happened here. Ballot initiative possibly to just flat out repeal 2013-18. And then, of course, calling the mayor at 714-2150 and saying, Mayor Mike Navarre, please veto this, 714-2150. And then the valuation of the property taken. And I guess that's really goes to the constitutionality of it.
Right.
Which always sounds kooky, doesn't it? I mean, what a kook story down there talking about the Constitution. We're just trying to protect the salmon. It feels good to do this, Charlie, and that's the part that I have a hard time opposing this is because I'm a lover of salmon, been here my entire life. I was 4 years old when you got here, or when you started your job, based on our earlier math conversation. Point is, I care a lot about the environment and so forth, but this, to me, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, show me the actual science, the study that shows the correlation of the two, because otherwise, why not ban red Hyundais? Because it might be a red Hyundai.
Exactly.
It might be just as, and that sounds farcical, but...
Put a little bit of common sense to this situation and be reasonable and fair with everybody in your discussion. If you support the science, how can you support science that provides no numbers to support or back it up? It's a real easy number. It's a real easy search. You can go in and count these small. I believe you can. I don't know. Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. Maybe they're just assuming the degradation of the vegetation that's along our properties could impact it. But I think there's a bigger impact, and it's called fishing. It's called fishing. It's called drifting. It's called set nets, and it's called sport fishing, and it's called a dip net fishery, where they let us go down and catch fish. Now, they've told the dip netters, if you catch king, you got to let it go. If you catch king in the Kenai River right now, you got to let it go. They've not. I mean, you've got a number of dip netters that hold number of permits for a number of nets. Drive down along the Sterling Highway and look out there in Cook Inlet and see how many buoys you see floating out there today. There's a lot of nets. And so what I'd say is there was some discussion provided that recently one set netter caught one fish. Well, there's hundreds of nets, and if every of those 100 nets catches one king salmon and kills it, when you've got 3,000 to 4,000 escapement at this time, I think that's a considerable concern. It is for me, and I don't understand why the fishing industry is not jumping up and down and concerned about it as well.
Assemblyman Pierce, thank you for taking time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. Don't go anywhere. More to come here on Radio Realty. You're listening to Radio Realty. Don't you worry about a thing. We're going to go into our 1 o'clock news break here in a moment. And on the other side, we'll return with, as promised, Assemblyman Mako Haggerty taking time out of his very busy summer day to talk to you and I about a few different things. A couple things on the menu today. We'll talk about the anadromous streams ordinance, of course. He was a proponent of that, so I want to delve deeper into that subject, see if we can come to some understanding with each other where we're coming from on that position, and also term limits, and I want to give him an opportunity to explain his commentary relative to part of the job of the Assembly is to slow development. I want to get deeper into that commentary as well. You'll have an opportunity in the second half of the show as well to answer our mermaid trivia contest. It'll be a real estate trivia contest, and I'll send one of you to The Little Mermaid on the Homer Spit for free. You don't want to miss that. Also, Sister Sarah, oh brother, would you vote for Sarah Palin for Senate, the Senate seat, should she run against Mark Begich? Of course, first she'd have to run against Lieutenant Meade Treadwell and Joe Miller. I don't give Joe Miller a snowball's chance, but I don't know about that. Let's just find out. What do you think? We've got quite a few people that have already entered to win. I want to give you an opportunity to take home an Alaska Aloha hoodie. Text me now, 299-7653. Would you, yes or no, vote for Sarah Palin should she run for Senate? I kind of maintain that she's more popular outside than she is inside. One listener wanted to let me know they felt the votes were by those that care. Term limits were voted in by the voters and should be changed by the voters if it's going to change at all. Well, you heard earlier Assemblyman Charlie Pierce. We talked about a number of issues. We'll be back with Assemblyman Mako Haggerty and talk about a few more. And we'll have our mortgage moment with Rhonda Johnson. What are mortgage rates doing, and what does it mean to you? I'm Christopher Story, inviting you to stay tuned to the greatest show on earth. And if you miss any portion of the program, remember, radiorealty.us is the website. You can check it out there. We'll see you back here in just a minute. You're listening to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story, your host for great adventures in real estate, coming to you live from the corner of West Hill and the Sterling Highway, the home of the Story team and the home of all things prosperous and possible. Well, the Homer News comes out tomorrow. A lot of good things to catch up. Here's what Lori Evans has got to say in a nutshell. She says she'll be catching up. You'll be able to catch up with Senator Lisa Murkowski. As you know, she spent a lot of time here over the 4th of July. Michael Armstrong's got a report from her July 3rd speech at the Homer Chamber of Commerce, if you missed that. And you know what? No matter where you are, whether you're over in Kodiak, Seward, Delta Junction, Fort Greeley, Soldotna, Kenai, Nagiski, Nanilchik, I don't care where you is, you're going to want to go to homernews.com and read that article, because Lisa Murkowski has a habit of saying things in Homer that she doesn't say elsewhere. You'll recall the War on Women comments. What's happening up at Bayview Park anyway? Well, you'll have to find out in the Homer News tomorrow. Lots of great opinion pieces. In fact, one written by, what's his name? Oh, I know, me. Wonderful photos of the 4th of July, and fishing looks like it's picking up. You'll find out that and more. homernews.com, and of course tomorrow, wherever papers are sold. A little secret, you could probably go tonight to the website and check out some of those stories in advance. Homernews.com. Mermaid Cafe Real Estate Trivia Contest starts right now. Every day you can go to the Little Mermaid on the Homer Spit overlooking the harbor. It's an awesome little place, and also some of the most amazing food in Alaska you're ever going to find is at the Little Mermaid for lunch. Dinner location is at Old Town. The Mermaid Cafe, the original Mermaid Cafe in Old Town, open for dinner. Local greens and local fresh fish. Gourmet at its finest. Mermaid Cafe. All right, here's your question. I want to send you there for free. 299-7653 is the number to text me your name and answer. And here's your question. Compared to last year, have more or less homes sold in Anchorage this year? Compared to last year, this over last, have we sold more or less homes in Anchorage? Now, you might be saying, what do I care about Anchorage? It's just the metropolitan by which we measure, the metropolitan market by which we measure the whole state in general. So more homes or less homes sold this year? Text me now, 299-7653. With me on the line is Assemblyman Mako Haggerty. Mako, thanks for being here today. I know you've got a busy business in the summer, and this has got to be rough for you.
I've got a great crew down there, so they've given me a little bit of time off.
Oh, terrific. That's fantastic. How many boats are you running these days?
Well, we have 3 operating most of the time, 4 when we have to dig deep, and we have 3 busy most of the time.
Cool. All right. Now, how long have you been on the Borough Assembly? I forget. Is this your second term?
This is my second term, and I'm in my first year of my second term.
Okay, got it. So you've got a little time left. Real quickly, you may have heard Assemblyman Pierce and I talking about term limits. I'd love to start our conversation there. And so obviously you're going to be impacted by the People's Initiative that imposed term limits on the Borough Assembly. And I've heard you speak against term limits conceptually, but for the process that was the initiative. So you're not going to be supporting an Assembly repeal of the term limits, correct?
That's correct. I'm not gonna support the repeal, but I do oppose term limits. I think I've been not outspoken, but I've made my position clear from the very beginning, even before I was elected. That was one of the questions that was frequently asked when I ran for office, and I let people know that I was opposed to term limits. I think we should have the option to vote for whomever we want for the position, and if they're doing a good job, we should keep them there.
Yeah, I disagree wholeheartedly. I agree with you that people should take voting more seriously, and I'd love to see, instead of 1 out of 4 people in a room going to vote, I'd rather see 3 out of 4 whenever possible and increase the number of people participating. But the thing I like, Mako, about term limits is that I think ultimately it's too easy. The power of the incumbency is real. I think even in small town elections and borough elections, I think that is really a real concept. And You know, a person such as myself, let's say, for example, just sitting around the living room one day going, I think I may run for assembly, and then, well, boy, you know, I just know Mako's going to run again, and it's going to be, I think we will get fresh ideas, we'll get fresh blood, and we'll get new people involved in the system and a whole lot more proactive if it's going to be a turnover every 2 terms. That's just the way I see it.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, for sure, the incumbency is an advantage. There's no question about that. But, you know, basically this is a volunteer job. This isn't a career. It's not a benefit to me personally. It's kind of a public service. That's the way I see it.
Oh, absolutely. I think it is at its heart public service. And I commented on this yesterday on our sister program, Alaska Matters, that I think, though, Mako, and I'm not pointing at you, but in general, power, influence, and pushing one's own agenda is a form of compensation. And so I agree with you that, and I've heard this used a lot, that, you know, career politicians and so forth. I don't think that that's the case at our local and municipal elections. I do believe, though, that power is its own form of compensation to some people. And I think that that's where I'd like to just take a little air out of the room and say, you know, you're here for just a short time. Do what you think is best, and then we'll say goodbye to you, and we'll move on. And in fact, Assemblyman Wolf and I are of like mind on many, many issues. And I even told him here about 3 weeks ago, I want you to go at the end of your 2 terms, Kelly. I want you to go and let someone else take your spot. Okay, let's talk about a very contentious, very hot topic that has taken, gosh, at least since I've been aware of it since September of last year, and really focused on it. And that, of course, is the passage of 2011-12, the Anadromous Streams Ordinance. And, Mako, let me lay out my case, and then I'll give you plenty of opportunity to respond. Number one, no notice was given to the property owners. The private property owners were not afforded notice, written notice, to alert them to the fact that they ought to be, in the words of the mayor, paying attention and come down and participate in the public process. Such that your assembly, your group, decided, hey, you know what, in the future, why don't we tweak the law so that doesn't happen again, even though this was in accordance with borough law and borough code. Why don't we make it where this doesn't happen again? And ultimately, that's what I was pushing for, Mako, was that we not tweak and modify 2011-12, but we literally kill it, put it to bed, and then come in through the front door. And you say?
Well, I say I agree that notice it was a good idea, especially for those people with properties that were affected by that ordinance. It wasn't in the borough code to do that, so therefore it didn't happen, and it wasn't out of any design by the sponsors of 2011-12. It was just the way it was.
Were you one of the original sponsors, or was that just Assemblyman Smith?
No, just a supporter.
Okay.
But getting back to the notice,
we
had 3 public hearings on this when it was going through, and every time there was a question about whether or not we'd received enough public input on it, we just moved it on to the next assembly date. So we had 3 public hearings on it, which is far more than we do on most stuff we pass, even some of the controversial stuff, or most stuff that we visit. It gets 1 public hearing. 2011-12 got 3 public hearings.
But is that without notice? My contention with that is without notice, I don't know. In fact, let me just, not even a hypothetical, a real case scenario, was a friend of mine who owns a piece of property on the Caribou Lake. And when I became aware of this, he said, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm on Caribou Lake. And he goes, I did get one of those packets in the mail, but it says on the river, so it doesn't affect me. I'm like, dude, it affects you. You need to wake up and pay attention. It most certainly affects you. And I think that impacted your public hearing. You could have had 20 public hearings. If the people affected don't know about it, I don't think they were doing any good.
Well, I have to agree with you.
Okay, nice. We'll stop there. No, I'm kidding. Well, okay, but let me just say this. We need to take a quick break. We're with Assemblyman Mako Haggerty. We're talking about your private property rights versus the Ordinance 2011-12, which morphed into 2013-18 and was and is passed, and that's what we're talking about. We're also going to talk about whether or not the Borough Assembly is tasked with slowing down development here on Radio Realty. You're listening to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story, your host for Great Adventures in Real Estate. Coming up on deck, we've got our Mortgage Moment brought to you by Rhonda Johnson with Alaska USA Mortgage Company. Currently in the hot seat is Mr. Mako Haggerty, Assemblyman Haggerty. We're talking about streams ordinances, and more than anything, Mako, my opinion on this is not really about the science. It's not about the salmon. I call this an ordinance that sounds too good to oppose. I mean, how on earth, Chris Story, can you sit there day after day thinking and talking about opposing an ordinance that would protect salmon? And to be honest with you, Mako, this is where you lose me. I don't believe this ordinance is going to protect the salmon, and I don't believe that there was sufficient science to back it up. And by that, I mean to say this. As Assemblyman Pierce said earlier, show me the statistics that show a direct correlation, not from California or Columbia River or anywhere else, but in Alaska, that shows that what he's doing on his lakefront property or what anybody else is doing is actually diminishing the return of the king salmon.
Well, I have to really take exception to what Assemblyman Pierce said. When it comes to the science, we had lots and lots of testimony at the meeting, not the last one, but the one previous to that, about this the riparian ordinance. There was lots of testimony. There was lots of testimony from scientists. And I'm not a scientist, but every one of the scientists that testified they were in favor of this ordinance. And I didn't hear one scientist come out and say this is going to be harmful to salmon, the ordinance. And the other thing I'd like to counter is the idea that this ordinance is going to save the salmon. It's not going to save the salmon. There's hundreds of ways that the salmon are impacted by human behavior. Fishing, of course, is maybe one of the biggest ones. But any little thing we can do to help protect the salmon, I think we have a duty to do that.
Well, and that's a slippery slope, because at some point I could make the argument that any boats on the Kenai River are hindering the salmon habitat. I could make an argument that that we shouldn't allow people to have a certain size motor on their boat, not just in the Kenai River, but in any bodies of water where the salmon may migrate through and to. And I think, Mako, my worry there is that what happened is that private property rights were trampled in the name of this might do some good, so we'll try it. And I think that whenever you do that, it's dangerous, and it's a bad precedent. And I just keep coming back to science or no science. It's about the process. And, I've heard you say before that you're learning more about borough politics and borough business and how things happen. This is my take on it, that when you ignore the fact that this started with, I think it was stillborn. When you say that it wasn't, no notice was required, so it wasn't given, I think the Borough Assembly had an obligation to the citizenry to step up and say, well, it's not the law to notify you, but we're going to do it. Because anybody who's ever been through a subdivision process, Mako, knows that you can't even split a lot in half without notifying all the surrounding property owners. You know what I mean? Yeah,
that's absolutely correct, and that's why it's in the code now, and I think it's a good idea. It's one of the things we came away from. One of the positives, I suppose, from your perspective on this ordinance. So
let me move to your comment, because I wrote this down. I was listening to the Assembly meeting a couple of weeks back, and your comment really kind of shook me to my core. And I talked about it on the show, but I said, and I told the listeners, I'm going to give you an opportunity to address it. So I am doing it now. And the comment was, we need to slow down development. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I would really like to take that back in the way it came out. I think we need to encourage development that's going to benefit not just today, but the future. And if I could say it all over again, I think what I would have said is we need to slow down and ask ourselves what kind of development we want on the Kenai Peninsula. That we shouldn't just it shouldn't just be a free-for-all. That there are things that impact others, and it goes back to the private property versus public property argument. That the public property has, a great importance, because that's the legacy we leave, that's what we leave our kids, and that's the quality of life that we develop for ourselves. And I think all that has to go into the formula or the equation on how development takes place on the peninsula. And so by my statement of slowing down development was a poorly formed statement.
I took it, and I appreciate what you're saying there, and I'm glad I actually brought it up and gave you an opportunity to speak to it. But I felt personally like it was sort of lifting the veil of what this ordinance was all about to begin with, and that's what a lot of us feared. And that leads me to my next question, which is to your other comment was that realtors need to read the studies that show how these types of restrictions actually raise property value. And I wrote that down as well because, well, we're not only and solely concerned about property values, because part of the charter of our organization as a nationwide effort is to protect the rights of private property owners, and part of that has to do with value, of course, but that isn't our sole initiative or push forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we all have certain rights, but our rights, my fists right end at the beginning of your nose, and we don't want to have we may or may not want to have hog farms in our neighborhood, but that's that's one of those things that we want to regulate. I believe. I don't want a commercial hog farm next to me. That's my take. Maybe everybody else does, in which case that's the way it's going to be. But it's more than just about it's more than just about private property rights. We can't just have a free-for-all, and I'm not opposed to development. I'm just opposed to a free-for-all.
I understand, and there isn't. I mean, there is no way. If you've done any development, and anybody listening, if you've done any development in the last 10 years, you know there is no free-for-all. There is so many restrictions, Mako, already. For example, a client of ours replaced a culvert in a ditch. Okay, so this is an existing 16-inch culvert, put in a 20-inch in its place for better flow, et cetera, and was the hammer was brought down on this individual because, unbeknownst to him, the ditch was actually to be considered a feeder into another small dribble that was then considered a feeder into Ruby Creek and then into the Anchor River. And this was an expensive process with three-letter agencies crawling all over him and his development. There is so much, I feel like, and I appreciate you listening to me and hearing what I got to say, and you've been very respectful of that, is to say this, that there's so much already in place that is hampering private property rights that I don't think you need to worry about. But I have to say, I've never heard that analogy before. Your fist right stop at my nose. I like that. That's good.
Or your fist at my nose. How's that?
There you go. Well, and so I think realtors got a little bit of to continue that pun, a little bit of a black eye in this process because we are standing up so fervently for in large.
Well, let me calm you down on that, because really and it goes back to what I mentioned, kind of touched on at the assembly meeting, is that there have been lots of studies done on how these riparian habitat protection areas, what do they do to property values? And the studies are in. I mean, people have done these studies because we're not the only ones that have put in habitat protection areas alongside anadromous streams, and so or even trout streams, and where those ordinances have been put in place. They've done studies, and it's turned out that the property values have actually increased.
Well, and yes, I understand that argument, but I go back to that's not the only point that realtors were making. In addition to, you could also hamper and say no new subdivisions, no homes shall be built this day forth. in this particular area. And, well, by law of supply and demand, you do the same thing. You'd increase private prices. But anyway, Mako, I've got to run. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and you are to be considered a friend of the program. Welcome anytime, and hopefully we'll have you back and we can continue this lively discussion.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me, too. Thanks, Chris.
You're so welcome. And don't you go anywhere. We'll have mortgage rates and more coming up here on Radio Realty. Welcome back to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story. We've got Rhonda Johnson with us to give us our mortgage moment. Hey, Rhonda.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
Good. Thanks for letting me push you to the back of the program. I apologize for that. But when you get on with, an assembly person, you just keep rolling.
Well, that's good. You get some good information out there, Chris.
Let's get a little more. Let's see here. Mermaid Cafe Real Estate Trivia Contest. Rhonda, do you know or do you think that more or less homes have sold this year over last in Anchorage? We'll use that as a metric.
In Anchorage?
Yeah.
More sold this year.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Last year, by the same date, by July 10th of last year, 935 homes sold. This year, year to date, 1,075. That's an increase of 75 plus 65. Somebody do the math real quick. Rhonda, that was you. 140. All right, nice. Anchor Point is looking about the same. I've got all the stats, but I won't bore you with them all at the moment. Let's get to today's mortgage rates, Rhonda.
You know what, Chris? Hey, the rates are still looking really great. They're below 5%. We're looking at about 4.625 on the 30-year fixed rate with an APR of 4.786. That first-time homebuyer, though, Chris, is still at 4.25 with a APR of 4.376. So still nice, under 5.
I love to help people get pre-qualified before they start shopping, simply for the standpoint that they know the mortgage program that is going to be best suited for them and their needs. That helps us determine whether or not a home will fit into that category. What's the difference, Rhonda? This has been coming up lately. What's the difference between a pre-qualification letter and a 90% letter? Is there any difference at all?
They're about the same, Chris. We take the information that we have that they bring into us. We take a look at tax returns, W-2s, paycheck stubs, bank accounts, credit reports, and based on that information, we can pretty much tell whether the loan is going to be a go or not. But there's always that final verification process, and sometimes we get documentation in that tells us different things than we got on day one. And after we gather all of that, we still have a final underwriter that's going to say yay or nay at the very end. So there's always a chance that it doesn't go through, even though we think everything looks good. But we try really hard to make sure that we've got everything covered before we get that far. And shopping with the loan program in hand is really important. So how, just briefly, give me the 15-second snapshot of I'm thinking about buying, I'm thinking about getting pre-qualified. What's the first step? Yeah, definitely come in. Let's figure out how much you can qualify for and what loan program. Because you, as a realtor, need to know what kind of homes to show them as well. We put 50% emphasis on the borrower qualifying, credit and income-wise, and we put the other 50% on the property qualifying to make sure that it's going to be a good, safe home. Okay, let's talk about zero-down loans in 10 seconds or less. Rural development, are they funded? Yes, lots of money. Let's go get them. Okay, I love it. Rhonda Johnson with Alaska USA Mortgage Company, 226-8815 in the Homer Anchor Point area, Central Peninsula. Check her out at 714-4391. Anywhere in the world, RhondaJohnson.net. Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, it's rapid fire, lady. Got to move on. Okay. Let's see here. We've got Stephanie. You are one of our winners, in addition to Julie. Julie and Stephanie are winners, and no go on Sarah Palin. In fact, it was a majority of people that said no. Several people said absolutely. A majority of you said no. So Julie and Stephanie, you're winners of Alaska Aloha. And John, you're the winner of our not mortgage moment, but Mermaid Cafe Real Estate Trivia Contest. You knew that more homes have sold this year than last year in Anchorage, and that's proving to be true. Let me just give you the rundown. This would be Anchor Point, Anchorage, Homer, Soldotna, Soldovia, everybody. All things considered, we're up about 3.5% over last year. How do you like them apples? Okay, thank you to everybody. David, thank you for keeping me on track today and doing a great job as my engineer and producer and buddy and friend. And I want to thank all of you out there for listening. I'm Chris Story, wishing you a great day in the great land. We don't have too many laws. The forest is our